This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail, and I'm pleased to be joined on today's episode by Eugene Yukin. Eugene is the vice president of product at MessageGears, and we're going to be talking to him kind of about the evolution of AI, particularly as it relates to retail marketing, and kind of why marketing AI isn't necessarily getting any smarter. And there's some interesting feedback there from Eugene. So we'll learn more about MessageGears as well. So a lot to come in this episode. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today, Eugene.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be on the show.
So just really to get us started, I know you've spent most of your career on the brand side, product roles at large retail organizations before you've moved over to the platform side. So to kind of give some context for the audience, can you give our listeners a little bit of a quick sense of the journey that you've been on and how it kind of shapes the way you see today's topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in product obviously for 15 years or so, and a big portion of that has been in retail and e-commerce, from, doing order communications at places like Home Depot, being in a big fashion e-commerce player, or building marketing technology teams at a large fashion apparel company. I've kind of had a chance to see it all, and especially just from being on the inside, understanding the kinds of pressures that marketing teams at big retailers and kind of the problems they face. What does it take to get a marketing campaign out the door? What are all the different teams that are required to do that? What are all the different blockers that these teams are facing? And I've seen it all, and I had a chance to work on a lot of these problems in terms of how do we solve it internally? What do we as a retailer have to do to actually get campaigns out the door faster, or improve our metrics that we're trying to tackle? So after doing all of that in all these different places, I found myself at MessageGears for the last close to a year and a half, where it's been super exciting to actually be working in a product that solves these problems actively. So that's me in a little bit about my journey.
So taking that industry experience from different retail organizations, you mentioned you've been at MessageGears about a year and a half. Tell the audience, for those that aren't entirely familiar with MessageGears, tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so MessageGears is a cross-channel customer engagement platform. We activate data from your warehouse across multiple marketing channels, whether it's email, SMS, push, in-app experiences, and we get to work with some of the world's largest retailers. One of the things that probably makes us different is our architecture and the way that we develop our product. And the biggest thing here is that we activate all of your campaigns and all of your data directly from your warehouse. We don't copy data outside of your warehouse to then do it and activate it in our marketing cloud. We do it directly at the source, and then we immediately write all of our engagement data, all the engagement data that you create, straight back into the warehouse to make it smarter. And it's that feedback loop that we pride ourselves on and that we keep investing into within our product. That's why tons of companies use us. We work with big companies like Chewy, Orlando Magic, GoDaddy, and many others to drive all of their marketing.
As I alluded to in the outset of the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about AI, and just to kind of provide a current state, tell me what you've seen from, and specific to the retail industry, what you're seeing in terms of how AI is being used, what's kind of been the use cases or what it's looked like in the industry so far.
Yeah, I'd say it's been a tale of kind of two different stories, right? What are the retailers doing themselves with AI? And then what is the consumer doing right now? And broadly, I'd say that you've kind of seen this massive initial wave, especially with tools and all the frontier models and all the stuff that they're putting out into the market. Retailers immediately started playing around with probably one of their biggest problems, which was content generation, right? Using AI tools to generate subject headlines, copy, image generation. Content creation has always been a big blocker at large retailers. And so you found that a lot of retailers went into those use cases, but what you're also seeing is that a lot of times that doesn't actually have a measurable impact on P&L. I think the MIT looked at enterprise generative AI pilots last year, and they found that roughly 95% of them showed no measurable impact. So that's been interesting. And you kind of seen this whole boom bust cycle with around a lot of these use cases and a lot of these tools that retailers are doing. On the other side, you're seeing what's happening with consumers, right? Consumers are using AI tools to shop. They're using tools to compare prices. They're using all kinds of agentic capabilities to do shopping for themselves. And that's just blowing up. I think that we saw 700% year after year tool usage was being completely driven and growing by consumers. So we're seeing kind of those two aspects. And I think the next wave that's coming that we're about to start seeing is, well, you have all these consumers that are using agentic capabilities to shop. How are retailers going to respond? What are their marketing teams going to do? And I think the big question there is going to be decisioning. It's going to be, how do we decide for every single consumer? How do we target them right this second, right now? What are they doing? How do we reach them? What's the message we send them? And to really do well in this next wave, you're going to have to figure out what to do with your data. It's going to be completely driven by how your data is put together and how you're generating that complete picture about your customer.
Have you seen, or in particular marketers thinking that it's just as easy as, using their chat GPT or Claude or their AI platform of choice and saying, create a holiday campaign for our new product, and then sitting back and kind of letting the bots do the work, so to speak? That's kind of, how people have been thinking about, and to your point around the need for content generation, whether it comes to email copy, subject line, and thinking that the bots are going to go out and do that work for them?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, a lot of these agentic capabilities are almost here, right? I mean, you can use AI agents to create a draft of a campaign, create content for a particular segment. You can type out, describe an audience, and it will generate an audience for you. And it all depends on, there's a lot of the devil's in the detail here in terms of how's your data set up, what context the agents have. A lot of these capabilities that we would have thought 2 years ago was just crazy sci-fi, I mean, those are here. I mean, that's possible to do right now. But the difference is, and here's kind of the thing, which is you could have two retailers that have all the latest AI tools, that have very advanced AI practitioners in their marketing teams, and they'll get wildly different results. And the reason for that is the data set up correctly? And have they optimized their data set up to get the best answers and get the best results that these AI models can actually help them with?
So yeah, to your point, retail marketers are using AI. They've fully adopted it, and they're using it more than ever, and they're getting better at prompting it. Yet the results seem to be plateauing, right? They're not seeing that incremental lift that they would expect. In your opinion, why isn't their marketing AI getting any smarter?
So, like I said, with how their data set up, a lot of times the bottleneck, it's not about the prompting, it's not about the loops they're running, it's not about even the AI models that they're running. A lot of the times it's just generally how much context are you providing to your AI broadly to be able to make the best decisions and the best actions from that. And if you're, let's say, you're a retailer, your purchase data, your inventory data, your store data, your customer marketing engagement data, if that's living in different places, then you're just not going to get the bang for your buck because it's not connected. You're not seeing the full picture. Or even if it is in the same place, but there's latency or the data is stale, you're not going to get the full complete picture. And I think that if you're looking at the market, you're looking at what retailers and large enterprises are doing. I mean, many are still struggling. I think that one of the statistics I read was about 65% don't have AI-ready data practices. And that's, of course, playing into this big problem because people are looking at the industry, they're looking at what's happening in the market, they're seeing these incredible advances with AI tools, and yet when they're starting to actually play with them and incorporate them, they're not seeing those results. And of course, the work to actually do that is much bigger, right? How do you actually set up the data? How do you bring it in? And that goes directly into the choice of vendors that you're selecting when you're actually pulling and actually planning how you're going to do marketing at a large enterprise.
To your point about the choice of vendors, one of the most richest, most valuable behavioral data sets is that engagement data that, is oftentimes is trapped inside a marketing vendor's app. Tell us why that's such a problem, how you think about that at MessageGears in terms of that engagement data and how it can help inform AI-driven decision-making.
Yeah, no, I'd say that there's, two kind of major elements to that question, right? The first is the engagement data truly is one of your richest sources of behavioral data on your customers. And if you think about it, you're a retailer, your customers are shopping with you, and you're sending them different kinds of communications. Maybe it's a life cycle campaign, maybe it's a welcome journey, maybe it's transactional communications, and they're engaging with your brand through different ways, whether they're on your site, whether they're signing up you're giving their phone number to get some kind of initial discount, you're sending them emails, and they may be skipping emails, clicking in one, going to a landing page. They may be opening up and downloading the app for the first time. All of that engagement are extremely rich moments of truth about your customer behavior that you want to have. And so if you're operating on a subset of that data, you're not actually seeing into the whole picture. So having that engagement data be in your warehouse and then connecting it with the broader business and the applications and the full picture of what's happening in your pricing systems, your inventory systems, what's happening in your store systems, that's the thing that starts creating the ability for you to personalize the experience for the customer a lot more. So that's one aspect. That's why it's really important to have it. The second point is when the engagement data is trapped in a vendor, and of course, there's all kinds of different setups, but just largely, the one thing you're missing out on is how is that engagement data, what is it training? So you may be engaged with a vendor that has lots of shiny AI features, but are they training those models off of your engagement data and taking the high level kind of takeaways off of their entire customer base? Or are they really feeding all of those proprietary endpoints and model improvements directly back into you? And I think that if you look under the covers, a lot of the times you're finding that your data and your engagement data is improving AI systems that will never make it back to your own company. And I think that's where the rub is where you have to be really careful about, are you creating context that is going to stay with your company, or are you just creating context that's going to stay somewhere else?
So for retailers, and to your point, that are operating across multiple channels, multiple internal technology systems, there's data, siloed in many cases. They do recognize the importance of that single source of truth, a fully connected data ecosystem. While that concept is understood, I imagine it's more difficult to execute it upon that kind of concept and idea. Tell me some of the challenges that you hear from retailers and other marketers about that kind of fully connected data ecosystem and enabling that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the good news is if you're most retailers, and it's getting obviously more widespread today, most have a modern data warehouse, or at least are leaning towards having modern data warehouse, whether that's Snowflake or Databricks, BigQuery, Redshift. I mean, you have all these modern warehouses that thankfully give you a lot of tools and flexibility about how you're actually putting the data in there. And so the number one fundamental aspect is just having that warehouse where you can start collecting data and having different business teams in different parts of your business start using that warehouse more smartly. Where it gets tricky, of course, is that once you do that, you have to ask yourself lots of different questions. One is, what do you do about customer identity resolution? How do you do customer consolidation? Multiple customer records? How do you handle suppression? Those are all the different questions that you're going to have to tackle when you're putting all those different records and all those different parts of your business into the warehouse. So there's definitely, it's not as simple as just that. The other complexity that organizations of course struggle with is how much of an investment do they put into their data team, right? Because let's say you have a marketing team that actually creates all the content, sends out all the campaigns, but you still have to have somewhat of a data team that is able to make sense of that data, create a taxonomy for that data, create a semantic layer over that data that will then enable a lot of these business users in the business to actually activate that data somewhere in their parts of their business. So that's kind of where I think the fundamentals are there, and companies are definitely moving in that direction. But those are some of the struggles. My last point here is to say, I think it's now or never, right? Because with the rise of AI models and agentic capabilities, the governance nightmare that's going to happen as you start you start using agents all across the business, you're going to want to have all that governance and all that data more so in a singular place.
All right. To your point, you need to act now, otherwise you're going to get passed by competitors as well. We've addressed some of the challenges from our audience of, many retail tech leaders listening to our podcast. What advice or thoughts would you have to share with them about reshaping their data architecture to support that high performing AI? We've kind of addressed the idea, the challenges. What are some actions they might be able to take?
Yep. So I'd say that the biggest one is, again, identify, are you activating from the source, right? So let's say that you are sending parts of your data, let's say to a vendor's cloud, or you're sending it into different kinds of places. The number one question I'd ask is, are you actually creating your email campaigns, or are you creating your audience segmentation off of stale data, right? Is it a day old? Is it half a day old? Is it several hours old? Is it 2 days old? And surprisingly, I'd say that, from my experience, sometimes it's really not that fresh. And so the number one question you first ask is, can we activate closer to the source? What can we do to activate the data as soon as it comes in or as soon as it actualizes, instead of syncing copies or sending it somewhere else? So that's one whole element of all these different questions that I would focus on in that area. And then the second thing is, take a really good look at, once that data is activated or once a customer is engaging, what's happening with that engagement data? Are you writing it back to that same place? Not a high level summary of that engagement data, but how much of all of it is actually coming in, because a lot of that is going to tell you the truer story about what your customer is doing.
Just to dig into that data architecture a little bit more, what does that continuous feedback loop look like in practice? Maybe you can break it down step by step, Eugene.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of steps to it. Again, you are creating an audience segment. Let's say you want to target a group of, your customers in a certain state, maybe in a certain season, maybe it's a weather related thing. Maybe you want to sell them a jacket in cold climate. You want to look at, who are all the potentially interested customers that would fall into that segment at that moment in time. So that's step number one. You're activating the data in your warehouse, and you're able to now create an audience, and you're able to activate it and send it out in campaign, whether it's email or SMS, depending on what their channel preferences are. The second step is that gets realized. Templates gets put together, content gets put together, the message goes out. The next step is customers actually looking at that, they're engaging in it, whether they're ignoring it, that's an engagement signal. You've sent out 3 emails over the last week and no one opened them, that's an engagement signal. Or maybe one of them opened and somebody clicked onto the site or opened an app. That's the second thing. You write that data back, and immediately as the data comes back, it's retraining all the models. Now, what typical models are you going to run into? LTV models, churn models, best optimal path models, channel preference models. They're immediately getting retrained. And just to demonstrate that, I think that there's a couple of examples you can look at. And I think we all experience it just generally shopping in our lives. Let's say that you're looking at marketing data that's trapped somewhere and that's not part of the warehouse. That might say, we've sent a campaign, this person's ignored my emails for the last 2 weeks. Is it because the offers aren't good? Is it because you need to give a bigger offer by that 6th email? Or is it because maybe there's a customer support issue? Maybe there's a delayed order that happening somewhere, and that's why that customer is not engaging. But you're only going to find out if you're going to actually start looking at the bigger picture, right? So your model that's saying, hey, what email should we send next, could be completely different if it's also seeing all the customer support tickets. Or maybe the person's not engaging because the size of a person's jacket may be wrong, right? Or maybe the product is not exactly what they typically buy. But you're only going to get a sense of that from looking at the inventory system on what's available. So those are the types of connections that you're going to start wanting to make in this feedback loop, which only truly becomes possible when all of that data is residing in a singular place, where all your agentic capabilities and your AI models can read from that entire context. That's what's going to make personalization much more possible.
So how would you address potential objections to this approach that you're talking about? I'm thinking about the CIO that might be listening to this episode and they're, raising their hand and worried about security. There's governance issues, there's potential cost. What are your thoughts there in terms of addressing some of those objections?
Well, from a CIO perspective, I'd say there's really 3 considerations you always have to set. Like, what's the data security picture? How is that going to look? Second, what's the cost? And third, are we learning, and is our intelligence compounding over time, right? If you're looking at through that lens from a security angle, centralizing or utilizing marketing tools that activate data at the source is a huge advantage, because you're not copying data into lots of different tools. So if you think about it, every single time you have to deal with PII data transfers. Even if you're not transferring PII, you have to work around that. But your data lives in one system, it lives in a different vendor system, and a third, fourth. Sometimes you have 50 tools at a large retailer. So you're having to deal with a lot of data security governance issues when that's the situation. Consolidating it or activating at the source reduces the amount of how and how often your data has to get copied. So that's one lens. I think that is definitely something to consider. From a cost perspective, there is an angle here that everyone needs to be aware of. Oftentimes when you're using engagement tools that are on the cloud, essentially there's a hidden cost because you're copying a portion of your data from the warehouse, all the things you need for marketing, you're putting it in a vendor's cloud. Each time you need a new data variable to go into that, or you have much more data available in your warehouse that you'd like to personalize marketing around, you have to put that data into that vendor cloud one way or another. There's a cost to it, and that's where the hidden cost comes in. But on the other aspect, when you're activating directly from the warehouse, you are driving warehouse consumption, right? So the more you're using your warehouse as your marketing engine, you are having more costs there. But the difference here is it's that cost that you can actually see, right? Those costs are visible to you. You're understanding what all the different teams are doing inside of the warehouse to actually activate the data. And I think it's visible costs you can actually control, which is different than hidden costs you don't see at all when you're dealing with a vendor system that's completely outside of your warehouse. So that's the difference from a cost perspective. The third point, I think, in the last one, which was the question is your intelligence compounding, right? I think in the last month or so, we've heard time and time again just how important it is for enterprises to control their own data. And is their AI actually improving over time? And I think that's the biggest question, which is when you're thinking about what your data and all the models it's training, is it training your own data? Or is it compounding that intelligence for you over time? And is your architecture set up that way? And I think that right now it's becoming clear for everyone, especially as we're having all these debates of frontier models and are they copying data from businesses and what's all happening in that whole space. I think it's super important to have a clear eye on, well, we're centralizing our data in a single place. This is going to be our context layer. Here's how we're going to build it out. And this is going to be our long-term advantage in this space, given everything that's happening.
You think about also, and we talked a little bit, but also that accessibility across the organization, different, we've talked primarily related to the retail marketer, but other teams within the organization, and accessibility to the warehouse, and then that single customer profile and the value there, as well as kind of how that can help accelerate speed to market and decision-making.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I got to see, when I was working in retail, one of the biggest questions we always got is like, there was this sense of frustration on marketing teams. It's like, we have so much data available, or like, hey, I met with that team over there, or I met with the finance team, or I met with, the store team. And they're telling us that they're doing all these really cool things in stores and they have all this rich data available in their system. Like, why can't we personalize around that, right? And there's that sense of constant frustration that you're sitting at the tip of an iceberg of all this rich data that you can actually use to make a great customer experience. Instead of sending something that's just blast and you're praying that it's going to, hit the consumer the right way and they're going to react to it, you realize just how much breadth of personalization you can actually drive. And I think that from that perspective, a lot of the times when you have different teams that can talk to each other, whether it's the finance team that's explaining to the marketing team the financial goals of the business or what they're trying to drive to, or whether it's the store teams that are trying to explain to the marketing teams like what their promotions are for the upcoming season is going to be in stores. And then all these different teams start talking to each other and realize that that data is available for them to use right now. That's when you can start actually having connections that are not frustrating, because you're like, oh, well, just so we can do that, we're going to have to talk to the data team and pipeline that data over here into that system. And then we can create an audience segment and send something out. Now you can actually have conversations like, oh, why don't we just try that idea today, right? Why don't that idea that we have for a great marketing campaign, why can't we send it out in a few hours? That becomes possible. I think that gets teams excited, gets teams working together. And I think that's when you really start turning the curve on this concept that I think we've all had as marketers for the longest time, which is like, I have a really cool idea. how do I send it out today instead of in 5 to 10 weeks?
So for the retailer that kind of has listened to our conversation and is going to follow a little bit about what you've been spoken to, Eugene, and they want to route all of their campaign data back to their core data warehouse. They're doing this right. What is the ultimate ROI for their AI initiatives? What can they hopefully expect to see as a result of that effort?
Well, all the studies, and if you look at just generally personalization programs and what they drive, when personalization is done well, and lots of studies have shown us, I think one of the ones was McKinsey, it'll drive a 10 to 15% revenue lift. And you look at different studies about what does personalization do? It totally makes sense, right? If I'm engaging with a brand and that brand talks to me that like they know me, I'll react to that better. I'll pay attention to the messages that they're sending me. And I think that it makes sense that consumers that feel like the brand that they are engaging with knows them as people or as families, they'll respond better to that. And so the ROI directly stems from there, right? Which is at the end of the day, everything we talked about so far, how your data is structured, how the engagement signals are powered with all the other business data that you have. All it leads to is better personalization and much more confident messaging to the consumer and to your customers. And that is the thing that drives meaningful ROI. I've seen it happen in my experience whenever we introduced more personalization to a channel, whenever we thought much more meaningfully about the audiences that we're creating or the segments we're creating, we always started seeing much more of an uplift. And I think that's the biggest ROI that a business can get from that.
Yeah, and that initial conversion, but then to your point, if you continue that, feeding that data warehouse with relevant, rich data, then it can help improve the engagement that you have with that customer ongoing. So you see that LTV increase, right? You see that loyalty increase as well.
Exactly. Loyalty increases, LTV increases, a better understanding of your customers, right? Some customers are going to shop with you a lot, and every single business is different. Some shop with you 4 times a year, others shop with you once every month. How do you approach them? What kind of offers do you send them? How do you incentivize them? How do you think about their path with your brand and with your company over the long term? So it allows you to start treating your customers much more meaningfully. And it's not, like you pointed out, just for that initial conversion or giving them an offer that they'll pay attention to and convert with you for the first time. It's what do we have to do over the next several weeks to retain them as a customer for the next 2, 3 years? Those are the kinds of things that you can start now thinking about and become much more possible.
So for our audience of retail marketers, technologists that are listening and are convinced of kind of what you were telling them, where do they start? What's the next thing they can do to immediately kind of get up and running and moving towards this approach that you've kind of advocated for, Eugene?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say that, there's 3 major things. Number one, if you're a retailer, think about your customer base. Think about where am I reaching them right now? Where is our most effective marketing programs? And what channels are we reaching them on? And then I'd say the question then is go and run the audit, which is where is the engagement data being generated right now? Is it landing back in our warehouse? Is it connecting back? What's the feedback loop? What's the latency? And what shape is it coming back in? And I think that's going to be very eye-opening for a lot of retail tech leaders to really do that audit. I mean, in my experience, we would sometimes run that audit and be like, wow, like that data is 3 days old. And we have to change that. This is going to be a huge source of data for us that can actually help us personalize more. So that's number one. Run the audit, understand where is that engagement data? Is it making its way back? Second, I think just generally, broadly, when you're evaluating the technology landscape, which is changing all the time, changing drastically, ask the different questions, like not what AI features do you have from your vendors, but how do your AI capabilities make it back into my company and enrich my own AI capabilities, right? Not how is my data training your data to be better and what flashy AI features you have, but more so, what are you doing around your architecture that's enriching me and our company better for the long term? And I think, and at what cost? I think that's really the question you should start asking. And last is just now that you have those 2 things under and that you've asked those questions, choose something and start running that feedback loop, right? You've made your engagement data back. You have your data team, your marketing team, start running experiments, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a strategy or a win-back program, prove it end to end and see how is it getting better and better. Because the more you expose these types of feedback loops to your teams and to different teams, then you start seeing how they start thinking differently about running these programs generally. So that's the high level, I think, things that I would start thinking about immediately.
Well, we've just about out of time for today's show, but I do want to take the opportunity to thank Eugene Yukin. Eugene, again, is the Vice President of Product at MessageGears, for joining us on this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Eugene. A lot for our audience to take away from this. So thanks for the time today.
Appreciate it, Joe. It's been great to be on here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please go to mytotalretail.com/podcast for show notes. Total Retail Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, SiriusXM's Pandora, YouTube, and YouTube Music. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.